The cafe buzzed with laughter, but for Ayan, every sound was a storm. His coffee trembled in his hand like it shared his secret. He rehearsed a simple hello in his head. 20 times, maybe 30. Every face seemed to watch, though none really did. His mind whispered, "You don't belong here." He smiled, or tried to, but it felt borrowed. Outside, life looked effortless, conversations flowing like rivers. Inside him, silence was louder than anything else. Ayan's mornings always began with a battle no one could see. The alarm clock wasn't just a signal to wake up. It was the sound of anxiety stretching its limbs. Even before he opened his eyes, his mind had already begun rehearsing the day's dialogues. How to greet his coworkers, how to smile naturally, how to hide the tremor in his voice. Each scenario played like a film he never wanted to act in, yet had to. The mirror offered no comfort. His reflection was both familiar and foreign, a face that practiced expressions like survival tactics. "You're fine," he would whisper to himself, forcing a half-smile. But he knew the truth. Fine was a costume, one he wore to protect himself from the world's casual cruelties. Walking out of his apartment was its own battlefield. The hallway seemed to echo with invisible eyes. A simple good morning from a neighbor could send his heart racing. He'd reply too quickly, too softly, afraid of seeming rude but terrified of being noticed. Every interaction felt like balancing on a wire. One misstep, and he'd fall into embarrassment. At work, things didn't get easier. Meetings were silent wars fought behind polite nods. When his name was called, time slowed. His throat tightened. Words turned into heavy stones he couldn't lift. He often rehearsed his answer a dozen times, only for someone else to speak first, relief washing over him like oxygen. He'd smile, pretending to listen, while his mind replayed every possible version of what he could have said. Lunch breaks were the loneliest hours. The cafeteria buzzed with chatter, but Ayan sat alone, scrolling through his phone like it was armor. He'd type messages and delete them, watching others laugh as if laughter belonged to another species. The ache wasn't just loneliness, it was the constant fear that he was the reason for it. When he finally returned home, the quiet felt safer but heavier. The world outside might not have noticed his silence, but inside, it roared. Ayan didn't fight battles with swords or shields. His wars were fought with thoughts, with trembling breaths, with a desperate hope that one day, being seen wouldn't feel so terrifying. Every morning, Ayan wore his mask, invisible yet heavy. It wasn't made of fabric or paint, but of practiced smiles, well-timed nods, and phrases rehearsed to sound natural. To the world, he was just another quiet, polite man. To himself, he was an actor performing the same role every day, terrified that someone would notice the trembling behind the lines. At the office, the routine began the moment he entered. "Morning," someone would say, cheerful and effortless. Ayan's lips responded on instinct, a small grin, a quick nod. His heart, however, thudded like it was trying to escape. He'd keep his eyes on his desk, pretending to read emails, all while his mind spun with self-conscious static. Did I sound weird? Was that smile awkward? Did they notice my voice shake? Conversations were mental marathons. When colleagues gathered around the water cooler, laughing about last night's show, Ayan hovered at the edge, close enough to look involved, far enough to avoid speaking. He laughed when they laughed, mimicking the rhythm of belonging. It was exhausting. By the time he returned to his seat, his jaw ached from smiling, his palms were damp, and his chest felt hollow. He often thought about how easy it looked for others, how they talked without rehearsing, joked without fearing judgment. For Ayan, even asking a simple question in a meeting felt like crossing a field of mines. He planned his words, revised them silently, waited for the right pause, and then someone else spoke first. The relief that followed was sharp but short-lived, replaced by shame for staying silent again. When evening came, his mask came off. Alone in his room, he'd exhale the words he couldn't say aloud. He'd replay moments from the day, cringing at imaginary mistakes. Maybe they thought I was rude. Maybe they think I'm strange. He wanted to be seen, but not too much. Wanted connection, but feared exposure. Ayan didn't know that his mask, though meant to protect him, was also trapping him, keeping him from the very closeness he craved. Tomorrow, he would wear it again, because the world didn't seem built for people who trembled at hello. It started as an ordinary Thursday. Quiet, predictable, safe. But safety for Ayan was fragile, like thin glass pretending to be strong. That morning, his manager smiled and said, "Ayan, could you present today's report in the team meeting?" The words hit him like a sudden chill. Present. Speak. All eyes on him. He tried to reply, but his throat tightened. "Sure," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. The rest of the morning was a blur of spiraling thoughts. His hands trembled as he typed, his stomach twisting knots around every imagined failure. He practiced his lines again and again, in his head, then under his breath. Each rehearsal ended the same, with his heart pounding and his mind screaming, "Don't mess up." When the meeting began, the room felt smaller than usual. He could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the clicking of pens, the low murmur of chatter, every sound amplified. As his name was called, time slowed. His pulse thudded so loudly he thought everyone could hear it. He stood up, clutching the report like a shield. The first few words stumbled out, dry and shaky. His palms were slick, and his vision blurred at the edges. He could feel his face heat up, that familiar burn of being seen. Someone adjusted their chair, another glanced at their watch, and in Ayan's mind, each gesture was a silent judgment. The sentences in his head scattered like frightened birds. He lost his place, his voice cracked, and the room began to spin. His breathing quickened, shallow, desperate. The slides on the screen turned meaningless. He mumbled something about a summary and sat down abruptly. Silence followed, polite, suffocating silence. Then the meeting continued, as if nothing had happened. But for Ayan, something had. He left early that day. The moment he stepped outside, he finally breathed, shaky, uneven breaths that carried more than air. They carried shame. He walked home under a sky too bright for how small he felt. In his room, the mask lay shattered, replaced by tears he hadn't allowed in years. It wasn't the presentation that broke him, it was the weight of pretending for too long. Days passed after the presentation, but the moment replayed endlessly in Ayan's mind. Every stutter, every glance, every imagined smirk. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the echo of years spent running from himself. He stopped going out, ignored calls, and let his meals grow cold beside unread books. The silence that once felt safe now pressed against him like a heavy fog. One evening, unable to bear the noise of his own thoughts, he stood before the mirror again. The same reflection stared back, tired eyes, clenched jaw, a face that had mastered pretending. But this time, he didn't practice a smile. He just looked. The mask was gone, and what remained was raw honesty. For the first time, he whispered, "What's wrong with me?" The mirror didn't answer, but the question lingered, trembling in the air like truth finally spoken aloud. That night, he searched online for what he'd always felt but never named. Articles spoke of social anxiety disorder, the fear of judgment, the avoidance, the self-blame. Each symptom was like reading pages of his own life. He realized it wasn't weakness, or strangeness, or lack of courage. It was a mind trapped in survival mode. The next week, he found a therapist. Even booking the appointment felt like climbing a mountain, his fingers shaking as he typed his details. Sitting in the small office, his voice quivered as he told his story. How even saying "good morning" felt like standing on a stage. How silence was both comfort and cage. The therapist listened, not with pity but understanding. That simple act, being heard without judgment, felt revolutionary. Over the next sessions, Ayan began to learn the language of his anxiety. He discovered how his brain mistook safety for danger, how his thoughts weren't always truth, and how progress wasn't a straight line but a slow return to self-trust. He learned to breathe through the tremors instead of hiding them. One morning, he looked into the mirror again. The face staring back wasn't cured, but it was gentler. The eyes still held fear, but also something new, recognition. For the first time, Ayan didn't see a failure trying to blend in. He saw someone trying, and that was enough. It had been months since Ayan's first therapy session. The world outside hadn't changed. The crowds were still loud, conversations still unpredictable, but something within him had begun to shift. The fear didn't vanish, yet it no longer ruled every breath. Each day became a quiet experiment in courage. One Saturday morning, his therapist suggested something simple. Try talking to someone new this week. It doesn't have to be perfect, just real. The thought alone sent a tremor through him, but Ayan nodded. That evening, he went to his favorite cafe, the same one where he once hid behind his coffee cup, invisible in the noise. The barista smiled. "Hey, haven't seen you in a while." "The usual." Ayan hesitated, then smiled back. A real one, not rehearsed. "Yeah, the usual. How've you been?" The words left his mouth awkwardly, unevenly, but they were his. The barista chatted for a moment, and Ayan listened without drowning in self-consciousness. His heart still raced, but it wasn't panic this time. It was life. He sat by the window, watching people laugh and talk, and for once, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He thought about the boy who used to rehearse every word, who believed silence was safety. Now, he was learning that connection wasn't perfection. It was presence. Later, he met a small support group for people with anxiety. The first time he spoke there, his voice trembled, but no one judged. Each nod from others was like a hand reaching through the fog. He realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to keep showing up, heartbeat by heartbeat. That night, back in his apartment, Ayan wrote in his journal, "Today I spoke. My voice shook, but I stayed. That's something." He smiled faintly, closing the notebook. The war inside wasn't over, but the silence had softened. Outside his window, the city hummed, the same world, the same noise. Yet, for the first time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation. And Ayan, the boy who once feared being seen, whispered to himself, "Maybe I belong here after all."